Alright, I am Web Captain Drew, your host of Vlogcast Island. That's right. Welcome back to another fun-filled episode with our discussions of the paranormal. That's right. As we get into this cold weather, it seems like it's the prime thing to discuss. For all of you paranormal novices out there and experts in the field of researching these wonderful, wonderful stories and subjects, I'm throwing in my 2 cents. That's right. I'm giving all my opinions of years and years of actually had my own paranormal experiences and some that I would share and have shared over the years on my show. But I find that, as we discussed last week, the Disclosure Project, there's all kinds of people in the know that want to get this information out there to everyone, because some people just don't have the time to try to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. We do have RBUX on deck. He's kind of a little guy alien and trendy hipster, so we got him helping us out with that. But more importantly, the synchronicities that I'm discussing are about recently, this last week. It was cold and time to put on a good documentary to help put me to sleep at night. And if you need to get put out, watch something educational, right? Well, one of my interests in this field of documentaries is I find it fascinating, like the characters like Tesla or Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer. I actually did a song called Destination Oppenheimer, and I was really proud of that, to get that album done, and that's kind of my input on some of the things that I like to discuss or watch. But there was a documentary on about Oppenheimer, and I was like, I'm going to check this out, because some of my artwork too, you'll see the atom. I've definitely done some very interesting designs with the atom and different varieties of that, or versions of it, over the years. So when I got to watching this documentary, I thought it was very interesting, because Oppenheimer, of course, if you don't know who he is, he was the scientist that was in charge of splitting that atom, and he helped to basically end the Second World War by doing that. So they were discussing this and, talking about his life and how he got into starting the program at Los Alamos, or that area where they did all the test range stuff there. And so as I was watching it, they started discussing, I think was a little boy and fat man. Those were the two big plume mushrooms that they dropped. And that was what seized everybody in their tracks, because they knew the Americans had created something that nobody could fight against. So as the story went on, they were discussing that later. Well, one of the cool things about, I suppose, Robert Oppenheimer is that the scientists that he worked with really didn't want to use the weapon. So some of them, with Robert Oppenheimer's help, went ahead and said, hey, we want to go to the big guy in charge and let him know, like, we don't want to use these weapons, because it could cause the end of everything. So they were forward thinking, as smart as they were, and what they built and how it would change the history of mankind altogether. There was a group of them that really felt like this is something that we had to do it, but now that we've done it, we need to go a different way with it, in which the United States government decided they didn't want to do that. They wanted to keep producing these weapons of mass destruction, which is really scary because if you look at the history of it, that's exactly what happened, and that's why we had the Cold War. So as I was watching it, they were discussing after this, after they ended the war, that they were going to start all their production basically out there in New Mexico because this is where it started, and so this was a good place for them to, if they had to plan future missions and use these kind of weapons again, this is where they would leave from, I suppose you could say. This is where the air base was that housed the Enola Gay, which was the bomber that dropped these weapons. So as I was watching that, I thought it was kind of ironic because I was like, that's a big time synchronicity. As many times in the subjects of paranormal, you hear the same stories over and over and over again. Sometimes, you might get a little different version, like the Betty and Barney Hill case, the abduction case, where, at first you heard what happened, you don't really know a lot, and then later on it goes on that they were in, did hypnosis and regression, and then you start to say, wow, this puts a whole new different spin on a story, because these were terrifying interviews if you listen to them. So after you hear, though, these same stories over and over again, you kind of start to get bored with them, especially with the paranormal world. I know that there's different versions of how people tell the Roswell story from different sides, or even a skeptical version of it. But what I thought was really weird was when they said where the air base was, where the Enola Gay, the bomber, was at, it was in New Mexico, and it was at Roswell, New Mexico. So kind of a light went off for me. And this is after you've heard about Roswell, if you're my age, your whole life, because it happened before I was even born. So it's kind of ironic when you think about it, because if you put that together with what happened, I heard through other documentaries before what they thought caused the accident or the UFO to crash in Roswell was that they were using types of radar that maybe had jammed this UFO's frequencies, and then it caused it to crash land out there in the desert, Matt Brazel's desert, his farm. So when I started thinking about this, I'm like, wow, that's kind of a big synchronicity, that if you think about it, and this is where they have this place where they're going to start putting all these weapons before they had the ability to use long-range missiles, it really starts to add up with an even bigger story. The bigger story is that a lot of people that are involved with these top secret projects, these government, black bag operations, are later on, after this, the ending of World War II, they start saying about how when they were building these other nuclear bases, that they were getting visits by these UAP phenomenons, that they were actually taking these bases offline. And this isn't just from one base, this isn't just one story, these are multiple stories. Now these guys are at one of the top military, to work at a base like that, first off, you have to have the top security clearance. You don't just get put on there to go peel potatoes, right? You're going to have some credits before you can go work on a base like these bases, where they house the most destructive weapons in the world. So what I thought was really crazy about that is that if that's the case, and these people obviously are all telling the truth, then maybe that is what really happened at Roswell. So the story is got a new spin on it, and I'm glad I put that synchronicity together. So, as I was saying, I think that there's probably been people that have obviously already put this information together. But when it occurs to you in this way, that there's really more to this. Most people I would say, as far as the public goes, if you took I'd say if you did a survey of the people in the general public now, most people probably would say that, yeah, there's definitely a conspiracy at Roswell. Well, I think this actually double proves it, like puts a double stamp on it. Because there's been so many interviews and stories about it, I think that sometimes we tend to stop listening to the story because it's old news. But when you listen to it for decades and decades, and then you hear something differently, and you put a missing link together that, it wasn't till years later, if you heard of the Rendlesham Forest case, that was our American base over in Europe that was allegedly had one of these computer systems taken offline where they weren't going to be able to launch their stuff if they had to, and there's more than one, like I said, more than one base where they experienced this, but these stories wouldn't come out till way later. So as these other stories start coming out, then you start really seeing these synchronicities and how one person's story from these bases, even that were in American soil, not just at the New Mexico Air Base, but where they were starting to put these ballistics in, these missiles, long-range missiles, that they were having the same types of experiences with these UAP interventions. And them basically later on saying, they were basically telling us, people in the higher ups of the security clearances, they didn't want us building these because they didn't want us to end the world as we know it. And if you think about it, that's what would have happened. These types of instruments or these flying objects have to have some type of instrumentation in them that would use electronics. So if they had some kind of magnetic pulse, well, it would cause, just because they might be more advanced than we are with their ships, it wouldn't discredit our stuff even having accidentally shut their computer or make their systems malfunction. There is obviously something about, I bet if you could interview Robert Oppenheimer today, I would almost put money on it to say they probably experienced stuff out there at the test site with UAP phenomenon. I do think that there's some mystery there. And if you start looking into people too that investigate areas like the White Sands or the Area 51, you start seeing that there's all this related sort of same fantastic stories of these, the orbs and UAP phenomenon out there too. So if they have weapons in there, which they are obviously testing flight, new projects for whoever the Air Force and or Defense, Department, they're going to have things out there that maybe if they're being watched by these superior intelligences, maybe they are. That is what you're seeing when you're out there, and they're all the time. People go there for it's like a tourist spot. All right, so what other synchronicities are we looking over? For me, I think this was the biggest one that I've ever really seen. And when you see these interviews and they're even going back to Roswell, and they'll talk about the air base that was out there. There was an air base out there, but they put in this thing where you have the first atomic weapon, or they're getting ready to ramp up production for this, and it's all starting in Roswell. It is a very big red flag. It really does signal a huge, like, it's a big indicator that a lot of these interviews and everything that you hear about people on these other bases, these nuclear bases, they are telling things that really, truly happened, had to have happened. So, and you know, when we think about too, like, nuclear energy wasn't just created for the purposes of war. Then they had good intentions to try to be able to create very inexpensive free energy with it. And, you know, as we learned over the years, it's just not, you can't trust it. So I think that when you start seeing like this, what's the word that you would use? It's like a link, maybe. When you have these linked together in this way, to me, the next synchronicity that we have been missing all along is that the government is the ones that know the most about all these UFOs and this UAP phenomenon, right? I mean, we've always kind of, I think, knew that, well, NASA knows things, but NASA vehemently denies the existence of ET life. There's never been any real statements from them saying, oh, we've seen this on another planet through one of our telescopes. They always like deny. And why is that? Because it would probably make them have to answer too many questions. So the second biggest synchronicity is that the people that knew all along the most about this phenomenon, they were the ones that if you go back to the 1950s, especially in America, the mentality of people back then was that you trust your government. Like, we know that is not the major consensus of the majority of people nowadays. How many people do you actually ever hear say, oh, I trust my government and everything they tell me? You'd think they were crazy. Like, so we know that is something that, too, that when this subject was taboo and people were like being criticized for their beliefs in it, it made it really hard, because then they're pointing the finger at the people that can just easily say, oh, people trust us because we're the government and we always do what's right, when in this particular field, they were keeping a lot of secrets. And even if you do look back on when they were splitting the atom, they say that was the most top secret project that ever happened in the world. They had hundreds of people involved in it and nobody said a word. So the government is very good at keeping secrets. And sometimes they're doing it because they want to protect us too. But I think that the difference now is that when you start seeing that, okay, yeah, they're definitely lying about things that happen. At the same time, you know, a lot of our people that are working in the government now weren't alive back in with the days of Roswell to really have maybe even a valid opinion on it, except for maybe if, you know, a few news stories or them discussing it randomly, because some people aren't even interested in this subject. So this all goes back to the synchronicity, though. Now, this is the third synchronicity that I see about all of it. The government knows they can't lie about it no more, because everyone can go out, film it, share it, and it can go viral, and 1 million people can see it in one day. So the difference now and back then is that the only way you were going to see this is if the random chance and the minor slim part of the population that had cameras available to them at the perfect timing to catch something like this happening, like a UFO or a phenomenon in the sky, was very rare, you know. And now there's cameras on everything. Like, some of the ones that you just see, like if you're scrolling through on social media, people catching stuff like on their, even their house system, their security systems for their house. Like, there's cameras everywhere. So I think that part of why we're getting disclosure the way we're getting it now, and them being more open to telling us that, well, we don't know everything, but we're trying to find out, is because they have to. They can no longer deny it. And it's a sad, but it's a true fact. And at the same time, as we start to send, like, the private sector is getting more involved in a space race. And this, I have, like, a really pretty much like a story that kind of fits this into a puzzle piece for this whole synchronicity thing. Okay, so this week I was like trying to think, what are the best topics for me to put my discussion on for the show, because doing the show the way I'm doing it, what makes people want to listen to me? What makes people want to hear my opinion? Well, in the case of this subject, it's because I've been around. This isn't my first rodeo. I've been around for a long time. I have experienced all this, and it is a really big subject for me. And what inspired me to do the Galactic Island series is because of that, and also because of the 3-Eye Atlas. So while I'm trolling around there on the net, I find this guy. I think his name's Ray. He has a YouTube channel called Ray's Astrophotography. And Ray is out there in this cold field with this really nice camera and doing his YouTube channel there and catching pictures of the 3-Eye Atlas in real time and then sharing them on his channel. So I thought this was really fascinating, because here's a guy, kind of doing his own thing. He's not getting paid to do it. And while us Americans are wondering all about the stars out there, our government is shut down, and NASA hasn't given us any information about this comet. So the fact that I'm getting these pictures from a guy that has his own channel and is not getting funded by taxpayer money is very sad. Like, it's almost like when we look at some parts of the government, there's like this archaicness to them that we did trust them for a long time. And I think the gig's up on a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to the field of UFOs, UAP phenomenon. I think that they missed the real boat as far as having an opportune time to just go ahead and disclose everything. And what is actually kind of ironic about this, when you look through some of the history of it, there were people that did try to push on this subject. Like, I've seen a few times where, they had made mention of the Clinton administration, and he was trying to, he was very interested in maybe getting some disclosure. Even like Jimmy Carter was. And so there have been presidents that have definitely, Ronald Reagan too, he was very interested in this subject. There were presidents that tried to do it, but even they couldn't get us this information declassified. So I think over time, like, it is important, because the government's not just going to go away, but we do need to vote for people that want to kind of give a transparency to this subject. If they're just ignoring this subject, I will watch out for that politician, because I really truly think that it's one of the most important stories of this last 2 centuries of human history. It gets closer and closer every day for us finding out what it truly all means. And the only way that we're going to do that is when people start to whistleblow and tell these stories where they're working in these classified areas, and they're have their clearance after they've been retired, and they can go ahead and tell the stories that that we need to hear and we need to know to prepare people, because that's the other thing too. You don't want to like shock the public if you're like all of a sudden one day we just wake up and there's like this occupation, which I don't think would happen. I think if they wanted that, it would have already happened. I just think that what it will really come down to is that humans will also, though, have to change a lot to grow with the higher intelligence so we can become part of a galactic community. And Web Captain Drew hopes to have his own little galactic island in all this. So I hope you enjoyed today's vlog, and welcome. Please come again next week. Leave your comments below if you like, and we will see you on the next. This is Web Captain Drew, over and out. Goodbye.